Lovely to see a few people in the room here today, and for everyone joining online, thanks for spending some time with us. I'm just going to jump in and get my slideshow started. So this afternoon, we're here to talk about excellence in stakeholder communication. I think stakeholders, regardless of whether you are a for-profit business or a not-for-profit business, are really important. And often it takes time and a bit of refreshing to sit back and really have a think about who your stakeholders are, how you can engage them properly, and what value that they can add into your business. And I certainly know that for community-based organisations, really having a strong strategy in place to make sure that you've got engagement, even to help with participation, volunteer and funding, is absolutely critical. So we're going to jump in and cover off today who your stakeholders are and why they're important, understanding your business goals or your community organisation goals, and then how to match those to your strategy, where to actually find your stakeholders, and then how we go about excellence in communication so that from both sides, from the stakeholder and from the organisation, we're getting the most out of the relationship. A little bit about myself. I have a Bachelor of Business and a Bachelor of Communications. I've been in business a very long time, but I've also been involved with major events, working with not-for-profits and lots of other organisations who rely very solidly on working with their stakeholder base. I moved here early last year from Melbourne and have been lucky enough to be involved with things like Botanica, which was a major event that we held in the Botanic Gardens late last year. And as I said, working with lots of organisations around Coffs Harbour. I also work with the Federal Government Entrepreneurship Program, which is a fantastic program that provides free support to small business. So let's jump in and talk about who your stakeholders are and why they're important. I think before we can really sort of jump in and figure out who they are and why we need to engage, the most important thing is to understand what we're trying to achieve. Obviously, in any business, we have a whole suite of people who connect with us, who connect us to the people that we're trying to work with. But when we're coming up with strategy, it's really, really important to start with this why. What are we trying to achieve? And it might be something different every time. An organisation like the Woolgoolga Community Gardens, for example, may have a major project that's on the roadmap, and they think, rightio, we want to build a brand new shed within the gardens, and we really need to figure out how to get the stakeholders that might relate to that project on board. For the Music Society, it may be around funding. So how do we make sure that for our 2022 program, we've got some plans and some initiatives in place to really make sure that we can maximise funding? And thinking about it in that way, you can really hone in on the right stakeholders to communicate with and to engage. So stakeholders, and I'm sure everyone knows this, but just to recap, is really anyone who's got an interest in, directly or indirectly, with the successful completion of your project or piece of work. Often we do forget about certain pieces of this puzzle, and it's really important to kind of go back and have a think about this on a regular basis. It may be that it's your employees or your team or your staff are the most important piece of the puzzle. It might be people who connect you to an obvious stakeholder. So whilst your stakeholder might be a certain person or group, maybe you need to connect with someone who's the right person to get you in and do the right introduction. I think customers are often quite forgotten in this process as well, and it may be that it's the people who attend your events or who come to your garden that it become a really, really important part of how you engage and what activity you can create. They're already involved and they've already got a vested interest to make sure that whatever you're doing is a really great success. So I think thinking about the people who are actually your customer is really important, and also colleagues. I've seen it many times where within organisations, there's lots of different types of personalities, and we know that certain people communicate well with different types of people. So I also think when you're considering your stakeholder map and how to engage the right people, thinking about who's the right person within our business to communicate with that stakeholder. And I think that sometimes things can fall down very quickly, or can be improved really quickly when you use the right people for the job. In your workbooks, I believe if you're online, you've been emailed this via digital or you've printed it out. We have a map for you to have a think about. And this stakeholder map just provides an opportunity for you to have a really good think about who your internal stakeholders are, the people within your organisation or your business, who the connected stakeholders may be, the people who connect you into different groups, and also who your external stakeholders are. And I think particularly with community-based organisations, and certainly in the Coffs Harbour region, having a think about how other organisations, other community groups, council, and people within those spheres can really have a positive impact on what you do and how you go about doing it. So I would encourage you to take a little bit of time when you have the opportunity to sit down with that map and really have a think about it, because sometimes you can come up with a group or a person or a contact who you may not have thought about for a little while, and they may become a really important part of the approach that you take when you're thinking about a particular objective. So once you've gone through this process and you've sort of mapped out all the people that you can think of in relation to your objective, the most important step is then thinking about how and when and what to communicate. Obviously, when we've got different types of stakeholders for a certain type of project or event or engagement, they all want to be communicated with differently. And I think this is kind of the next step in excellence in stakeholder engagement, is understanding, like us all, like with any business, different people want to be communicated to in different ways at different times, and nothing's different when it comes to stakeholders. When we're looking at who comes first, because like anything, for example, when we were running Botanica, we had an immense amount of stakeholders involved in that project. We were running it within a relatively short space of time. We had to get organised within 6 months. So not only did we need to organise all of the logistical compliance elements of that project, but we also had to think about marketing and how we were going to start getting the word out there, how we were going to get funding, how we were going to start bringing money in for the project so that we could actually get the event off the ground. And this is a great way to think about it. So basically, we're looking at 2 factors when you're trying to figure out who to start with first. Power, who's got the most power to support or potentially derail your project or work, and then interest. Who's got the most interest in the work project? And the people who have the most power and the highest interest are the people that you start with first. And once you start with those people, because really they're the ones who can have the most impact, you start working your way backwards from there. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That's exactly right. It may actually be that the people who are in that highest quadrant are really the people potentially who can derail the project the most. So I think certainly in the case of any project or event or community-based initiative, really understanding who's potential and who's got the likelihood to derail the project is very important, and really trying to understand where they're coming from and have a plan in place specifically to deal with those people. They may be not on that side. It may actually be that they're the biggest supporter, and you can also leverage the most support and the most interest in a really positive way, which is using them as advocates, which is using them as ambassadors and people who are prepared to go out and talk about your organisation, your initiative, your project in a really positive way. So I think when you've done your map, so you've done 2 things. You've mapped out who your internal, external and connected stakeholders are, and then you've popped them in that quadrant to understand who's the most important and where do we need to start thinking about dealing with them. Then we need to have a think about how do we want to communicate and who is the best person to communicate with them. In terms of really stakeholder advocacy and getting the best possible outcome from any of those groups, There's three key elements I think that are really important in any initiative, and they unite organisations that have an ongoing, very positive relationship. The first one is leadership, and I think having a really strong and clear leadership within any business or community-based organisation really makes things simple. And earlier in the week I spoke about working with a target audience and cutting through noise and being very clear and specific on how you get across what you're trying to achieve. And it's no different when it comes to stakeholder mapping. Being really clear about the purpose and objective of the organisation, being very clear about the positive benefits that come to anyone who engages or is involved with the organisation or event. Efficiently meeting objectives, so making it very clear about what your organisation is trying to achieve and making it clear that you're reaching those objectives and adding value. Everybody wants to be led in a positive way and understand how their own involvement, whether that's from within the organisation or a volunteer or someone who's funding your project, how are they helping? How are they adding value? How's that all contributing to a greater good? The second element is all around communication. And as we know, it's a two-way process. It's not all about telling people what you want and what you're doing. It's absolutely about listening and getting feedback from those different stakeholders to understand where they're at, where their interests are, and being empathetic along the way. It's about being relevant. So giving people the right information at the right time in a way that's going to add value to them. And it can be informal and formal as well. And I think in this day and age, when we're looking at the world of digital marketing and social media and people being super busy in their lives, they're wanting things to be fast and efficient and quick and simple. They're not wanting to read pages and pages of information at any one point in time. They're really wanting the right information at the right time in a very succinct and, easy to understand format. And once again, consistency is the key when it comes to marketing, communication, pretty much everything, being regular and consistent. So if you say that you're going to engage and send people information on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, make sure you do it. I think that being let down and people not doing what they say they're going to do is one thing that really kind of puts people off engaging and being involved. The third element in stakeholder advocacy is all around staff or team. And I think often we see this being let down as well, where you may have one or two people within the organisation who are completely across everything that the organisation is about. They understand the purpose, the objectives, they know how to help people find their way and navigate through things, but perhaps a whole load of the team don't. So when people come to the organisation or they ask questions, they're not getting the same experience. They're not getting the same information. They don't feel like the organisation or the business of the organisation is streamlined and aligned. So I think where we can share that information with staff, team, volunteers, maintain consistency at all levels, and talk about corporate memory, which is just that fact of if anyone asks anyone in the organisation the same question, that they'll get the same answer. And I think once your organisation can do that, it looks like a really, well organised, well managed, cohesive team. So in terms of communicating effectively, as we said, good communications is absolutely vital. It is a two-way process. So wherever you can build in a listening process into your organisation and into your feedback loop is really important. And that might happen in lots of different ways. It may be a formal survey to ask members of your organisation or subscribers what they think and how they feel about things that are going on. It might be informal. You might just be having lots of conversations and feeding that back to the right people in the organisation to give them ideas and thoughts from the people in the community. It's also really important to understand or help your stakeholders understand if advice hasn't been taken or used. So often we get this loop where people are providing feedback and saying, guys, this particular thing isn't working, or we'd love to see this initiative, or we'd love to see this type of event. and it doesn't happen, but they don't understand why it doesn't happen. So suddenly you're getting a bit of disengagement. It's like, well, I don't know why they're asking me in the first place if the information that I'm providing and the feedback that I'm providing isn't being taken on board. So I think it's really important to be able to share really open two-way communication when it comes to being a community organisation. And some of that may be, as I said, provided in newsletters. It might be provided in social media. It might be provided in a formal letter that you share with your subscribers on an ongoing basis. So feeling well informed is really central to creating advocates. The more that we can do that, I think the more successful any initiative will be. Where we've got senior stakeholders and certainly people who sit in that high power, high interest quadrant, they want regular, short and direct communication. As I said, those people are often really busy. So if you're dealing with business owners or businesses who are involved in lots of different things, or people within council or whomever it might be, it needs to be short, sharp and regular. And I think really understanding who the person is that's involved and how they want to be communicated with. Sometimes it might be a quick phone call because they get so many emails, they actually never read emails. I work with lots of people like that at the moment. It's like, send me a text message or give me a call. I can't get to my emails. My inbox is just way too full. So perhaps understanding how they want to be communicated with is really important. So plenty of options when it comes to thinking about how to engage stakeholders. Of course, we've got all of our traditional methods, but I think we can't underestimate the value of face-to-face phone communication and actually getting in front of people and talking to people. And I know people are busy, but I still find that when it's direct, when you can do it, it's really effective. It may be that you are creating a newsletter specifically for that stakeholder group because they're interested in a certain range of topics. It may be that you can do quick lunch meetings and catch up with people that way, or regular reporting. Once again, I think it's about really understanding who you're communicating with and finding the right team member to do that. In terms of effective communication, once again, we have some information on this within the booklet or the information that you've been provided on the session. And I think we've all heard this in life, absolutely, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and then tell them again. It's really important to have a think about this process when you're sharing any type of information. Whether it's a short, sharp piece of information, an email, whether it's what you're putting in your social media posting, or if it's something more detailed in a report or a newsletter, these are the types of things that people really want to know. And if you can cover each of these key things off, you know that you've done a good job of letting people get the full picture, the full vision of what you're trying to share, rather than just a what. So that's a good checklist to sort of go through when you're thinking about putting together your stakeholder communications. So we spoke about this briefly, but I think having staff who are able to demonstrate consistency and credibility is really important when it comes to stakeholder engagement and effective communication, because they're effectively around day-to-day working relationships. It may be that you've got people on the ground working with the general public, you've got people higher up in the organisation working with your larger stakeholders, but it's what happens on a day-to-day basis that really makes a difference. And I think that perception of the quality of people's organisation, their staff matters. So how are the rest of your team engaging with your stakeholder groups? I think it's important to remember that all staff are ambassadors, not only the leaders, and often they're the ones having those grassroots conversations and getting feedback and sharing information. So if you don't have a process of understanding what's going on at that level, it's probably a really good thing to have a think about. And of course, stakeholders, like any business, anyone coming into contact with your organisation, they value consistency. And that's two things. That's people, the people who are engaged in your organisation. So are they consistently there? If you've got a large changeover of team members and staff, it also makes it really hard to keep that really good, consistent communication. So I think having some consistency in your team is really important. And also of your message. what are the key things that you're trying to convey? What are the key messages that you'd like everyone in your organisation to be aware of? What are the things that if someone asks you, what's most important to your organisation in the next, 12 months? How can we help? That everyone's able to share the same message and give that message back. And once again, that idea on corporate memory. So how is everyone in the organisation able to point stakeholders in the right direction, in the same direction, so that they feel like they can engage quickly and easily, and they understand how they can add value or support you in a way that makes sense to them. I think it's important to remember that stakeholders do change over time. So particularly with community-based organisations, and as we said, your priorities may change really swiftly from year to year. One year it may be about funding, the next it might be about a specific initiative, the next it might be about something totally different. So not only will they change with the objective, but they'll also change in general. Of course, if you're dealing with larger organisations, they've got a much higher potential to change the key stakeholders that you're working with. So I think if you're able to really go through this process of mapping out your stakeholders, I guess, on an annual basis in general, so who's important to the organisation, and then go about doing that whenever you do have a specific project underway or an engagement underway, it will give you a really clear map and help you come up with a strategy that's going to make sense for that point in time. So I guess in summary, what we're talking about today is really understanding how to engage and understand your customers, stakeholders, same thing. The first one is knowing who they are in the first place and going through that process of mapping, identifying where they are they inside, outside, or are they connectors? I think determining what they need from you and what you need from them is also a really important part of the strategy, and will help you really come up with the steps, not only around communication, but also the right people within your organisation to deal with that stakeholder at the right time. Engaging with your stakeholders accordingly, so understanding who they are and how they want to be communicated with, and having a plan for that, building that into your business planning, and then revisiting your stakeholder identification very regularly. And then obviously we're really wanting to do that when, what, how, why, who, as often as we can and in a really effective and efficient manner. That's it for my session today. Thank you very much. Yes.
Sarah, one of the things that you did mention was there about your internal stakeholders. Sorry, I'm just coming so that they can pick you up for the camera, for the mic. One of the things you did talk about was, from a community organisation, internal stakeholders, and I think that's a really important point, and one you might want to elaborate about, having the whole organisation. Sometimes you might have different people with different viewpoints within your organisation, and potentially that could derail you to some extent, and the importance of bringing those people on so that they all can become advocates and you're all travelling in one direction, because that can have really big implications.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you want to expand on that, but I think the form of communications and everybody having the same message was a really valuable point.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to expand that and be able to express it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Heather. So the question is all around internal stakeholders and how you can really gather everyone together, even where there are differing points of view or opinions, and come up with a single version of the truth, so to speak. And that's just human nature, and it's the way any business operates. You don't have everybody who think the same way, who agree on the same thing. So I think for a community-based organisation, or for any organisation, it really comes back to strong leadership and really keeping your eye on the prize. What is the purpose and mission of our organisation? And whilst we may have differing views and opinions and thoughts, we all know that there is a greater good. What is the greater good? Sometimes we absolutely forget what their purpose or mission is. And I think if we can keep that really clear and obvious, and talk about that, and I think, communicate that it's great and it's okay to have differing views. But even if we do, we're here to achieve this one thing, which is why everybody's here in the first place. We know that organisations like the ones you all work with, there's a huge amount of passion and there's a huge amount of engagement with the people who are involved. They're there because they really believe in what you're doing. They're there because they really want to see a positive outcome. So I think really being able to focus on that, that core intent and making sure that's really clear and bringing people along for the journey. Sometimes you have to, that the leaders of the business or the leaders of the community organisation really have to help engage and keep people with their eyes on the prize. Any other questions? Nope. All right, well, thank you very much.